Hey guys, welcome to English Bootcamp Week 4A. So package 4 has quite a bit of stuff in it, so I thought we'd divide the video into two halves. So the first one is just preparing you to be doing some more reading. A lot of people coming into continuing ed haven't done that much reading in a while, and if they have, usually it's just sort of for pleasure. And the way that we read things for pleasure and for academic reasons is different. So we're going to start with some reading strategies and then some literary terms, so the vocabulary of the English language arts. So I'll just get my screen share going here. Okay. All right, so again, reading is more than just sounding out words. To be an efficient reader, you need to be able to be thinking while you read. If you think and reflect as you read, then your brain is actually creating new neural pathways, linking the new content to other things you know, and enabling you to extract meaning and comprehend the text in a new way. You'll be able to make observations and draw conclusions about what you read in a more deep and meaningful way. So I'm going to go over six reading strategies. Number 1, activate prior knowledge. Number 2, know your purpose. Number 3, monitor your comprehension. Number 4, ask questions. Number 5, inferring. And number 6, visualizing. So let's get started. So first off, we're going to activate your prior knowledge. And what that means basically is just to think about something before you read it. Before you just jump in and start reading, think about the topic. So you can read the title, you could read the information on the back of the book if it's a book, you could flip through and look at any illustrations or diagrams. And yeah, think about what you know already on the topic. This could be past experiences, this could be something you read or something you saw in a movie. And this is basically priming your cognitive pump. It's helping you remember relevant prior experience and knowledge. And basically it's creating a category in your brain in which you can store the new information. And it will help you extract and construct meaning from the text. So for example, this week you'll have to read the story Jumanji. Many of you have already seen the movie, so you can start by thinking about the movie. Did you see the original that came out in the 90s? What do you remember about it? What did you feel when you first saw it? I was a child when the movie came out, and I remember my parents didn't let me see it, and I was really mad. I really wanted to see that movie, but they thought it would be too scary. Did you guys see the more recent adaptation? Which version did you prefer? Did you ever wonder where the idea for the movie came from? So thinking about these things helps us to create a slot in our mind in which we can put the new information. Okay, strategy 2 is know why you're reading. So these first two strategies actually happen before we even start reading. The first one is thinking about it, and the second one is thinking about why we're reading, what the purpose is. So are we reading just for pleasure? Then we don't really have to worry about it too much. Are we reading to find out a specific piece of information, like a date? Is there a question we're supposed to answer after we read? Do we have to write a personal response? So for example, we want to read the questions we'll have to answer afterwards so we know what to pay attention to as we read. So for example, if you're reading to find out a specific piece of information like a date, if it's something really simple like that, then it's okay just to skim through the text looking for key words. Like say the question was, in what year was Canada's Confederation? So I'm going to just skim through, look for the word Confederation and look for 4 numbers. Oh, 1867, there I found it. I don't have to read every word. If we know we'll have to summarize the text after we read it, then it's a good idea to underline key points as we read so we can find the information again afterward when it's time to write about it. And again, if it's a book that you can't write in, like a textbook that doesn't belong to you, you should get a little pad of Post-it notes and then just stick the little Post-it notes in wherever you see those key points, and you can jot your thoughts down too. Just have a little arrow. If you have to write a personal response, so about what you thought and felt about something, then jot down notes about how you feel and what it reminds you of as you read. Again, that can be in the margins of the book or on little Post-it notes. The third strategy is to monitor your comprehension. So as you're reading, ask yourself, do I understand what the text is saying? Sometimes we find our mind wanders and we read a whole page or a whole paragraph and we didn't even take it in. Don't just continue reading, go back and make sure you understand. Sometimes there's a deeper level of misunderstanding. So if you don't understand what the text is saying, stop reading and do one of the following strategies. You can look back in the text to see if you missed something. You can ask someone, your teacher or another student, for help. Sometimes the meaning of a new word stops us from understanding something, so look up the meaning of words you don't understand. Or maybe you need to look up more general information on the whole topic, and you can do that really easily on the internet these days. So here's an example. I recently read the book Educated by Tara Westover. So let's imagine you're reading that book. The author keeps on mentioning Mormonism, but you don't know what that is. But it seems like it's a pretty important concept for understanding the whole book. So you look back through the text, and you think, okay, this might be some sort of religion, but I don't really know anything about it. So again, you stop reading and you look up Mormonism online. You find out that Mormonism is a religion that sprouted out of Christianity in the 1800s in the United States. And that gives you a lot more information to go on and to understand the rest of the book. All right, so again, stop and check, ask, do I understand this? And if you don't, find a way to understand. Again, you don't have to look up every single word you don't know the meaning of. I did French immersion growing up in school, and there were a lot of words I didn't know, but if I stopped to look up every single word, it would take me an hour to read one page. So if you find that you can still understand the general meaning of what they're saying, you don't have to look up every word. But if not knowing that word is stopping you from understanding the whole sentence, then it's a good idea to look it up. Okay, strategy 4 is to ask questions. So as you read, ask yourself questions like, I wonder why the author made this or that decision. I wonder what will happen next. What was excluded from the story? For example, say you're reading Anne of Green Gables, a Canadian classic. And you might ask, wait a minute, why are there no Indigenous people in the story? Obviously, there were Indigenous people on Prince Edward Island at that time. So what is the missing history here? That might be a question you ask yourself. If you're reading nonfiction, your questions might sound a little different. So let's imagine you're reading an article about women in the 1950s and you're hearing about how they really cared. Hey, the recording paused for a minute there, but it looks like it's working again. Okay, let's go back to this screen share. So again, say you're reading nonfiction, and then your questions might be a bit different. So let's imagine you're reading an article about women in the 1950s, and it's talking about how they really cared about being good housewives and good mothers, really cleaning the house. And then you might think back to some of the history that you know about World War II. Think, wait, a lot of women were working. They were in the workforce during World War II when the men were away. So what changed? Why didn't women keep working after World War II? What happened? And that might be a question that leads you to look up some more information or just something that makes you think a bit more deeply. It's a great idea to jot down the questions as you read. Strategy 5 is inferring. Now, that might be a new word to some of you. Inferring means reading between the lines. So often authors will show and not tell what they mean. They leave it up to the reader to pick up on clues about what is going on. So when you're inferring, you're bringing together what is spoken and what is unspoken in the text to draw your own conclusions. So let's look at an example. Here we'll read this paragraph. Clara burst through the door and slammed it. "How could you?" she demanded, her face hot and tear-stained. Her hands were held tightly in fists at her sides. Justin had been waiting for this moment, knowing it would one day come, knowing he would one day be found out. So what can we infer from this paragraph? Let's see. Well, the author never explicitly states that Clara is angry. He doesn't use the word angry or mad, but he shows us. So we can tell that Clara is mad by the clues in the text. She burst in, she slammed the door, her face was hot and tear-stained, and her hands were in fists. So that is evidence in the text that she's angry. So we can infer that she's very angry about something. Similarly, we can infer that Jason has done something wrong. Maybe an affair, we might wonder. And we can infer this because, number one, Jason is not surprised that Clara is angry. He says he's been waiting for that moment and that he knew he would one day be found out. So even though it doesn't tell us that Jason did anything wrong, we can infer it from the text, from the clues in the text. So again, inferring isn't just having a hunch or making things up. You need evidence from the text, but it's an educated guess. Okay, strategy 6 is visualizing. So that's just basically imagining what you're reading as you read, like a little TV screen playing in your mind. This is most useful for fiction because it's a story. It's like seeing a play in your mind. And one of the reasons it's a great reading strategy is because it actually makes your brain focus on the story in a more deeper way and helps you remember it better because you have these mental images associated with the words. So that one's really simple, but it's a great strategy. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is vocabulary. Know the lingo. So in English language arts, you might get asked a question like, who is the protagonist of the story? Or what is the setting of the story? And if you don't know what those words mean, you can't answer the question. So I'm just going to go over some of the basic vocabulary for literary devices and things like that. There's more, so if you come across one you don't know, be sure to look it up. Okay, first of all, the protagonist, that's a fancy word for the main character of the story. The antagonist is the opposite of the main character, the villain, or sometimes the negative force acting against the main character. In one of the readings you'll do for English 12, this family faces a tsunami. And so there's not a bad person in the story, but the tsunami is the antagonist. It's the negative force. The setting is where the story takes place. Okay, so the setting of Anne of Green Gables would be Prince Edward Island. Foreshadowing means giving hints about what is going to happen. A hyperbole is an exaggeration. So for instance, one might say, I could eat 1,000,000 hot dogs. You can't actually eat 1,000,000 hot dogs. It's an exaggeration or a hyperbole. Alliteration is when you repeat the same sound in a sentence or phrase. This is often used in poetry. So here's a bit of a silly example. Adoring alligators ate often the apples out of my alabaster hands. So the repeated sound in that one is the ah sound. Adoring alligators ate often the apples. All right, the next one we have is personification, and that's when you give inanimate objects, non-human objects, human characteristics. So for instance, if I say, the sun smiled down at me, the sun isn't a human, it doesn't have a mouth, it can't smile. But if I say the sun smiled down at me, it's like a poetic way of saying that it was a nice day. I had a good feeling about that day. It felt like the sun was, my friend. A metaphor is a direct comparison between two things, saying that one thing is something else. So, for example, his words were swords that cut into my heart. His words were swords that cut into my heart. Words are not actually swords because a sword is made of metal and words are sound vibrations, right? But it's making a direct comparison by saying that one thing is something else. That's a metaphor. A simile is very close. You compare two things, but this time you use the word like or as. So for instance, his eyes were like a lake of fire. I'm not saying his eyes were a lake of fire. I'm saying his eyes were like a lake of fire. Onomatopoeia is when a word sounds like what it means, like the word splash. The word splash actually sort of sounds like the sound of splashing. Allusion or alluding to something means referring to something else, usually another book or movie or a historical fact. So for example, in the sentence, he wore his shame like a crown of thorns, the words crown of thorns is alluding to the Bible and Jesus' death on the cross when he had to wear the crown of thorns. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. The first half of our package 4. You're ready to go on to the next video now and to try actually engaging in some texts and reading them. All right, see you guys.